think I know better than anyone that there's a whole bunch of candidates out there that are less than ideal for this year's local body election. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some great candidates running as well all over the Motu. So I figured I'd sit down, have a chat to some of them, learn about what it is that they want to bring to the table, see who it is that's running with it this election. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to the show. We're going to be sitting down with some of the election candidates from all over the Motu to learn a little bit about their vision for their communities, the kaupapa they want to lead with, and how they intend to achieve what they lay out. Joining me today from the City of the Future, the Technology Works, Kirikiriroa Hamilton, is Louise Hutt. Running for the Hamilton West Ward, Louise has been described to me today, like literally this morning, as a superstar of social media, someone who can take complex issues and undertakings of council and make them accessible to the public in creative and informative ways. Kia ora, Louise. How are you going today?
Kia ora, Paul. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I've had better days. It's been one of those ones where I get a whole bunch of those horrible messages from people going, "Oh, you missed this terrible person about this candidate who's actually a secret Nazi," which I wish I was making up, but I'm not. Um, but that was in a completely different part of the country. It's not in Kirikiriroa. Um, I love the city. Like, it's where I spent many, many years. There's so much potential there, but I'm not the one who's in charge. I'm kind of curious what your vision is of Kirikiriroa in the future.
Hamilton is a really cool place to live, and I've lived here for the past, 15 years. Um, it's somewhere that I really want to see anyone of any age or ability really thrive. So whether you're 8 years old, there's stuff for you. Whether you're 80 years old, there's stuff for you. And you can get around, find jobs, employment. So you can get around, find jobs, employment, education, and most importantly, just participate in your community.
How do you make that a reality?
Well, we've definitely got our work cut out for us, that's for sure. There's lots of things like just small changes that can make a really big difference. So, like this year, we have put in, I think it's about 30 new bus stops, or like not even bus stops, bus shelters, so that people aren't waiting in the rain. And it's things like putting in pedestrian crossings outside of schools because, believe it or not, children don't just sort of teleport to school. They do have to get like from their house to school, and crossing a road is a pretty key skill some kids are still learning. So sometimes it's really small things like crossing the road safely, or waiting for the bus and not getting wet in the rain. Sometimes it's really big things like making sure that our city has enough wastewater capacity so that we can build enough housing for the population growth we know that we're having, because it's big. If I had $1 for every time I've said that Hamilton is the fastest growing city in the country, I wouldn't be having to fundraise for my campaign, that's for sure.
Do you think people realize just how fast Hamilton is growing? Like outside of the city, from what I've seen, people just, they think Hamilton, they have a picture in their head. When I was down there a couple of weeks ago, actually, so impressed with the growth out north, like the industrial growth out north, the residential growth down south. There's a lot of planning that's clearly gone into it, um, especially if you look sort of out east towards the University Way and heading out further that way. It always feels like it's constantly changing, but do the people who live there understand just how much it's changing?
I think it really depends on where you live in Hamilton and whether the growth we're facing is at your front doorstep or not. Certainly, if you live near the boundary of the city, you've probably got some form of construction happening pretty close to you. Certainly, the north and the south are growing really quickly, but also some places out on the eastern boundary and the western boundary are both growing. And one of the new suburbs that we've planned for is called Peacock, and it has been in the works for over 50 years. And in the next couple of decades, the population of Gisborne will be housed in that suburb. So 50,000 people are going to live in one new suburb of Hamilton. And so we've built a new bridge,
Mhm.
we're building like massive new roads out there, so that we can accommodate all of the people who want to call Hamilton home. And obviously they're making a great and wonderful choice. But it does come with the demand for brand new infrastructure that we are often putting in from scratch. There are a few rural roads out in Peacock at the moment, but certainly not for what it needs in 10 years' time. And that new infrastructure has a real big cost. But on the flip side, there is also a lot of infill housing happening in Hamilton. So you're taking one house off a property, building, higher density. But our city has not invested what we've needed to in our water infrastructure. So there's about 30% of our city which is undevelopable. That's a real word that I didn't just make up. But that undevelopable part of the city, basically, if we were to allow people to build houses and connect to the wastewater system, we would have almost guaranteed overflows in our wastewater system. And I'm a big believer in like poo should go where it's supposed to go and not out into the street or into our waterways or eventually to the Awa. So we've definitely got some big constraints in how we're growing, whether it's through the cost or the lack of infrastructure, but it's something we're really trying to tackle.
One of the things I remember when I was working there, when I ran the cinema in town, is that we looked to the south of Hamilton as the growth area for the audience, because the north is really well serviced with things like the base and other shopping centres, supermarkets, stuff like that. But for people who lived south of the central city, we were the closest movie theatre, and it was a lot the same with centre places, the shopping centre, those kind of things. A lot of cities and towns around the country are struggling with the CBD and what to do at the moment. We see rising numbers of homelessness, for example. We see businesses closing down because they haven't been able to adapt the newer way that we deal with commerce online or as destinations. Is that growth down south that you're looking at Peacock, has that been taken on board for how that can help an area like the Central Business District of Hamilton?
Mm, yeah, definitely. Like, I know if you're looking to buy there, you're only one or two suburbs actually away from the CBD.
Hmm.
So, in terms of even just like commuter distance, if you live up in like Rotatuna in one of the northern suburbs, you're like 6 suburbs away from the CBD. And so your commute time is, you know, almost the longest it would be in the city. But if you're looking to move to Peacock, you've really only got maybe 2 other suburbs to drive through or bus through or walk and cycle through to get to the CBD. So it's definitely a very different proposal for people who might be looking to still work in the CBD. But our central business district has really been failed on multiple fronts over many, many years. And like one really key example is we've allowed buildings to just be vacant. There's a massive office building on the corner of Victoria Street and Claudelands Bridge that has been vacant for over a decade. And it's ironically owned by a company called the Wellington Company.
Hmm.
And you might think they don't sound like they're from Hamilton. They're not. But we've allowed this, I'm not sure how many stories it is, but it's, like 5 or 6 stories, office building to sit vacant for 10 years. And that's, at least 1,000 people who would have otherwise been working in that building, going downstairs and getting their 9:30 coffee and a pastry, or, stopping into the pharmacy to pick up a prescription before they go home. And it's just such a failing that we've allowed existing buildings which are sitting there with no one inside them, that are constantly getting their windows repaired because people chuck rocks through them because there's no one there. It's just such a massive loss for population. And the city has a plan for increasing the population inside the CBD itself, so there are more people not just working there but living and working there. But that wastewater constraints I was talking
Mhm.
about earlier affects the CBD, and actually affects a massive amount of the south of the city as well. And so not everything comes back to like how we manage where our poo goes. A lot of it comes back to managing where our poo goes. I like to joke that we've got like 2 options. We can either like invest in wastewater, or we can like put the city on a high fiber diet. But like that's probably not likely to work. So we probably just have to invest.
It is an interesting example of a place where you've had artificially depressed rates for years because we got to keep rates low. Catch cry of conservative councillors for decades now. Um, Garden Place itself is, for me, kind of like the ideal way of showing how that works because it's been very similar for at least a decade now, um, and trying to get anything done in Garden Place feels like an uphill battle. You try and clean the pavers and you get people complaining because that's a waste of council expenses, for example. How do you find a balance between investment in something like that in a place that is a placemaker and, the grumpy people out there who are complaining about, "You're wasting money on something I don't want."
Yeah, it's always amusing to read the comment section sometimes where people will be like, "Why are you investing in this?" But 3 comments later will say, "I actually don't ever go to the CBD, and I haven't been there in 10 years." And it's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, okay." So you're giving a hot take on something that you've not experienced in a long time and have no kind of commitment to. But I mean, I say this to people often, like, we do actually deserve nice things, and sometimes those nice things are not even that nice. They're like a bare minimum of like a street with clean pavers, or like not
Mhm,
having overflowing
mhm.
rubbish, or having, tidy streetscapes. And I think for Garden Place, it's tricky because you've got a lot of vacant buildings, or shops that are intermittently vacant, which is not helpful. It's a really big space that we need to make sure that it's easy to activate. And we have just signed off on an events policy that myself and Deputy Mayor O'Leary put forward during the long term plan to try and make it easier to hold events, and particularly in Garden Place. So we're trying to do some stuff to help encourage people to put on events, to make it a cool, fun place for people to come and hang out, because it's a large space. Like, it's not a little alleyway between stuff. It's actually pretty big. And I was really disappointed this term because there were proposals for a potential playground to go in opposite the library and to replace the kind of chessboard which doesn't ever get used. But that was stalled by some councillors who were concerned about people they didn't want to be using it. But the irony is, of course, if you have more people in a space, the behaviour across the board improves because there's more people there.
Mhm,
And so we can't put
mhm.
in a playground because there might be people who sleep there, or people who have been doing recreational activities there. Um, it's kind of like a vicious cycle. Like, team, we've just got to put the playground in, and like, there's a library right there. And I'm not a parent, but I empathize with the plight of small children wanting to go to the library. It's supposed to be a little bit quiet in the library. No, no, let's like take all that energy out on the playground before we go in there. Um, and I think you've just got to think about how whole communities want to use spaces. And just because some councillors you know, don't have children or aren't bringing children regularly into that space doesn't mean that putting in stuff for kids is not a great idea.
It actually raises a really interesting point as well about short-term versus long-term thinking. So a lot of the campaigns around the country this year are focusing on really short-term cosmetic stuff like, oh, speed bumps and oh, potholes and stuff like that. Um, but they don't argue the benefits of the long-term outcomes from putting something like a speed bump in, or, how hard it is to actually get out there and fix a pothole properly as opposed to just filling in a hole and hopefully things don't fall to pieces again. Um, have you had much in the way of success explaining this to people about the difference between the, short-term fix versus long-term planning?
Yeah, yeah. um, Something that was that came across our desks this term was to demolish a bunch of buildings that council had, and they weren't, well. One of them was Founders Theatre, but um, quite a few of them were sort of smaller buildings that um, might have had a tenant, a community tenant, but were really in quite disastrous states. One of them was so bad that we were only allowed in there for less than 10 minutes to walk through. We had to wear face masks, and there was like very clearly mushrooms and moss growing in the carpet. So it was a very, like, it was a public health risk,
Yeah.
the building itself. Um, and, staff were really blunt with us that this was a follow on effect from a austerity budget 10 years ago that sought to cut maintenance. And so maintenance had not been done on many of these buildings that we were looking to demolish. And so they were in a state where it would cost more to repair them than it would to build a brand new building. And that's such a perverse outcome. Um, but, I was having a conversation with someone who was really concerned about one of the war memorial um, uh, statues or
Hmm.
monuments,
Monuments.
and said, like, well, that's not in a good state either, but you wouldn't support demolishing that. And I said, well, no, that's sort of in a different category. Like, there's not someone inside it every day. But also you have to appreciate where, like, the legacy of this issue, because that they were someone who had otherwise very much supported austerity budgets. And I was like, can you not connect these things together? And something that's really frustrating me a lot at the moment in the election is people talking about, like, um, going for growth, and I'm gonna invest in growth, but I'm gonna cut rates. And, like, I'm not trying to say that our rates rise was great or wonderful. It wasn't. It was horrific.
Hmm.
Um, but on the flip side, a lot of people are saying, like, oh, well, I'll cut wasteful spending. And one of the things that was proposed in our long-term plan was, like, uh, reducing the hours the libraries are open. And now we've just built a brand new library in Rosatuna that is seeing more usage than any other library in the city. Like, I think the usage is about, like, 60% of all the people going to a library in the city are going to that one. So, like, were we right to build a library? Absolutely. And it's built for the population growth that's out there. So this is a piece of growth infrastructure, even if it's social infrastructure and not, wastewater pipes or roads. But to then limit the library hours, so it doesn't make any sense if you're supporting growth, but then you would, like, kneecap that infrastructure you've just built to try and save money on services. And so it's just really frustrating, but also quite baffling that people can't put the two things together. And of course, the alternative is that maybe it was maybe we would have reduced the hours of a different library, and it's like, oh, okay, so one from the older parts of the city, the poorer parts of the city, the places that don't have nice shiny new stuff. You were gonna. So which one is it? You shut the shiny new library, or you shut the old ones, which are really key critical pieces of social infrastructure for other parts. Ugh.
Yeah, like, there's no other way to sum it up. Like, there is a disconnect there for a lot of people, um, and messaging, I think, from some of the candidates definitely muddies that. Depending, it's all over the country. Unfortunately, there are candidates who do that. Um, when you go out there and you talk to voters at this time of year, what's sort of the big feedback that you get about council performance?
I mean, 29% of Hamilton voted last election.
Hmm.
And so sometimes when I'm talking to people, they simply don't know what council does. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but that's a state of our lack of civic education and our really unintuitive, like, local government, central government systems. Like, it's not easy to work out that your rubbish is done by your city council unless they have a contractor and then the contractor does it. Or, like, which road are you wanting to complain about? Is it a local road or is it an NZTA road because it's actually a state highway that runs through your city? So it's really muddy and messy. And something I try to talk people through is, like, hey, if you've got beef with something, tell me about it. Like, let me help you try and fix it, or at least work out the right person to talk to, so that you can, at least be complaining to someone who could fix it. And that's one of the tricky parts, I guess, is that sometimes people are like, I'm really upset about GP care. And I'm like, I hear you. Like, I totally hear you. Local government doesn't have anything to do with that. And in fact, central government has some things to do with it, but also sometimes not a lot as well. So it becomes so um, disjointed sometimes when talking with people, because the stuff, well, the systems that we've created don't make sense or they're not intuitive. So definitely what I can hear about is all over the board. And I try to make sure that I'm at least kind of, hello, I'll hear you out and I'll take you over here. I had someone really concerned about the anti-abortion protesters in our city that love to
Mhm.
hang out outside the hospital. And I was, you know, one of those things where I was like, I hear you. City council can't really do anything about that. Um, but I can put you in touch with someone at the DHB, or I can point you to a local MP or someone who holds a portfolio that will really care about this and has a lever to pull somewhere.
This year, Hamilton is one of more than 40 local authorities that have been lumbered with a referendum on the retention of Māori wards. It was not a popular thing according to the submissions that the government sat down and listened to. They were not particularly in favour of this move to force a referendum. It is a binary choice for a more than binary complicated issue out there. I'm really curious to know what your perspective is on the referendum.
Oh, I'd like to think that a lot of people know what my perspective is on the referendum. Um, During our debate on, we had a choice come to us: either completely disestablish the Maori ward or go to a referendum. And in our debate to choose to keep the Maori ward for one more term and go to a referendum, um, I took a little recording of our live stream of my debate, and it was viewed more than 60,000 times. So I like to think people know what my perspective is on this one. um, but I mean, Hamilton City Council has been around for, over 100 years, and there have only been four Maori elected to Hamilton City Council before we had our Maori ward. So this is not an equitable scenario for people. And it's also really important to note that we had already, like, City Council had already gone through consultation on this in 2021 and asked the community and said, hey, what do you think about this? And 80% were in support. So this idea that we need to rehash it because David Seymour and Christopher Luxon and Winston Peters really want to rehash this, they're not paying for us to do the referendums. So it's costing us an extra $100,000 that we don't have to hold a referendum on a subject we already know how our community feels and we had already implemented and was working well for us. I mean, my colleagues in the Māori ward are just phenomenal, and I'm so grateful that they sit alongside me. They are really like high caliber candidates that I just think, gosh, like, I'm so glad you want to do this. Like, you could be doing anything, and yet you're participating in this. Um, so I mean, it's just it's such a great example of the hypocrisy of this government who wants to tutu around with, is it English or Te Reo Māori that comes first on the passports, but then wants to like beat us with a stick about, well, you're not focusing on core services. It's like, do you think having a big referendum on Māori wards is a core service of local government? Like, no, you're gonna have all this racist rhetoric come out, which we've already seen with Hobson's Pledge. That's enabling that is not a core service of local government. And in fact, we were having really productive conversations. Our community was very clear about what they wanted, and we were a better city before we were forced to rehash this.
What do you think is the most important thing for voters to take on board when they cast their vote this year?
I mean, if they do vote, that's like wonderful. Like, I think you should get a gold star for that at all. Um, if you are somewhere that has a Maori ward referendum, you have to know that even if every person who is Maori voted yes, that is likely not enough for it to succeed because everyone gets to vote on it. And so it's really important that, especially for Pākehā, that we are out there voting yes, because it's otherwise not going to succeed. And so it's not something that we can be apathetic about. And, even if you want to do it to ruin David Seymour's day, I think that is a perfectly valid and
Mhm.
reasonable reason to do it. Like, we've had so many record submissions to government saying we don't like this racist bullshit that you're, you know, subjecting us to, which they did not campaign on. If you
Mm,
want to do something,
that's actually debatable in that there was at least two parties that did.
well, yes, yes. But if you really want to stick it to them in an incredibly tangible way, they've stacked select committee. You can say I don't like this in your submission, and they can say don't care. But actually, the referendum is binding, and if it fails, you will basically not be able to have a Maori ward for 10 years. That's a really long time with potentially no representation. So if there's one thing you could take away or make sure that you think about, even if you don't vote for your council, and you should vote for your council, even if you don't vote for your mayor, and you should vote for your mayor, do vote in your Māori ward referendum and vote yes.
Final question: where can people find more information about you?
Well, you can follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. I'm some version of Louise Hutt across all of those. Um, yeah, and I also have a Substack that I've not updated in a while.
Well, you've been a little busy. There's an election going on.
Yeah, I'm a little bit busy.
Louise, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Good luck for the election. We'll be keeping an eye out on things and doing a live stream, I think, on the 11th. Not that anybody will have actual results on the 11th, but we'll try. We'll pretend.
Maybe by like 4 or 5 o'clock, I think that's when people are going to get phone calls.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much.
Cool, no worries.
Hey, don't forget to give the video a like if you haven't done so already, and make sure you hit that subscribe button for the most in-depth coverage of local government elections anywhere in the Motu.